Back again for another episode of Marv's Room. Listen, Monday, October 7th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Tim and I are having our group Zoom meeting. If you guys would like to ask anything to us, SP related or anything else, we're going to be touching on all topics, probably mainly SP related, because we all know that's the hot topic all the time. So please don't hesitate to join the Zoom October 7th, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Looking forward to it. Now, on to today's video. I wanted to talk to you guys about taking action, because Tim and I, we just did a video recently, and I will leave the information to that video in the description. I want you guys to realize that in the Bible it says faith without work is dead. But what does that really mean? Think about all of the people who really get what they want in life. Think about the people who really get married or get a specific person or get a job or get whatever. They're putting in the time and the effort. And this is a step, in my opinion, we cannot escape. Most of you cannot escape this step, but you are trying to escape this step. And most of you guys are going to need to put in a lot more work than you probably realize. You're either going to need to put in more external work or you are going to need to put in internal work. It's one or the other. Now, in my opinion, what most of us should be working on is we should be 1000% working on internal work. Internal work, in my opinion, that's the real work that all of us should be doing. But if you know you don't have the gumption to do the internal work, then that's where you got to focus on doing the external work. But in my opinion, if you do the internal work, the external work becomes relatively easy because you've already did the work that you needed to do to get into alignment. And like I was saying, like I've said in past videos, many people, in my opinion, they have no idea how much work they actually really should be doing when it comes to manifesting and doing all of this LOA stuff. Because again, as I've said religiously, these teachings have become sensationalized, and people think, oh, all I got to do is affirm for 10 minutes every day, 15 minutes every day, and everything's going to be good. But no, it's not going to work that way for most of you guys that are really getting into this stuff. And the examples I want to use are a couple of examples that a lot of us know that follow this work. And something that I also realize is the more time and effort you put in to doing the work, whether it's externally or internally, the faster results you are going to get. Because you guys got to think about this. Think about people like Joe Dispenza. You don't know Joe Dispenza's story. A lot of people in this community know Joe Dispenza's story. He got hit on a bike. He was told he would never walk again, basically. And he basically sat with himself, sat with his own thoughts at first, but then he began to transmute his thoughts and he began to do the work internally, because he couldn't do anything physically, because obviously he couldn't move. He was paralyzed. But he began to do the work internally, and then he shifted. But I want you guys to pay attention to the detail of Joe Dispenza's story. In Joe Dispenza's story, he literally would lay in the bed for hours. Think about this. He would lay in the bed for hours. He said this in his one book. I forget the name of his one book that I read, but he talked about it. He would lay in his bed for hours trying to get himself into the state of being able to walk again. What would that feel like? What are the sensations of feeling myself running or walking on the beach or being on a bike again? He fought with himself for hours to get to that point. And that's the thing I think people miss out on that story. And he did it. He was able, to me, in my opinion, he was able to shift states so quickly because he did it every day religiously for hours. He fought with himself for hours to get in that state. And he fought with himself so much that eventually it got to the point to where towards the end of him doing all of his internal work, he was able to get himself in that state relatively quickly. It didn't take him hours anymore because he had already laid the solid foundation the month or so prior to doing the work that, you know, when it came time for his healing to come, in a sense, he basically was able to turn it on and off to get into that state within minutes, you know, and it didn't take him however many hours it took him previously. So I want you guys to think about that when you are manifesting whatever it is that you're trying to manifest. Joe Dispenza got fast results because he did it every day for hours. Most of us, in my opinion, depending on where we're at, what kind of state we're in, it's going to take us a lot longer than somebody like Joe Dispenza in a sense, because this isn't our main focus. Our main focus isn't doing the internal work. And this is why, in my opinion, so many of our manifestations are delayed, is because that's not the focus. These people that get great results with this stuff, in my opinion, their focus is on doing the internal work. And again, if they don't do the internal work, their focus is on doing the external work. So this whole point I'm trying to make is to show that action is necessary. And again, like I said to start off the video, but the internal action to me is more necessary than the physical action. Because if the internal action is right, then obviously the physical or the carnal, mundane, material possessions will show up, and the physical action will also show up as well. Let me give you another example. Jesus is another one. You know, in the Bible, Jesus, he would go to the desert. He went to the wilderness and for 40 days and 40 nights he prayed, right? He fasted. That's doing the internal work. These monks that you hear about over in Asia, and these yogis and these guys that do this weird stuff, these guys that meditate for 8 hours a day, these guys are doing the internal work, and they're doing it for hours. And that's why they get results so fast. So a lot of us, we got to get rid of this notion. If you've been trying to manifest something for a long time and it seems like nothing is working for you, it's probably because you are not taking enough action, whether it's internally or externally or a mixture of both. Again, to me, I would rather take the internal action, because studying Neville Goddard and Law of Assumption, we all know what happens when we do the internal work first. Look at yourself and ask yourself, how much work am I really doing? And it depends really on your situation, because so many people, their situations really determine how much work they should be doing, in my opinion. Most people, in my opinion, your situations might be so bad, or your subconscious mind might be filled with so much negativity that you should be doing this work a lot more often than you really are. But obviously we have our day-to-day lives. We have to go to work. You know, we have our responsibilities, our kids, if we have kids. We have all of that type of stuff. You know what I mean? So I get it, not being able to put this as your primary focus when you're trying to manifest things. But you got to understand, if you're not going to put it as your primary focus, then you must know that it's most likely going to be delayed, whatever it is that you want, because you're not making it your main focus like a Jesus or like a Joe Dispenza or like these guys that dedicate their life to this stuff. These people that dedicated their lives, that dedicated their days, their weeks, their months. These people typically, they get fast results because of the amount of action and work that they're putting in. If you know you've been through a lot of trauma, you can pretty much bet that doing a couple affirmations ain't gonna cut it for you. You can pretty much bet just doing a visualization ain't gonna cut it for you. You guys gotta look at your situation, because, and this is the problem with taking one size fits all advice. This is the problem with listening to coaches that tell you, oh, all you got to do is affirm. Oh, all you got to do is visualize. No, if your situation is much deeper than that, you're probably going to need to do a lot more than just affirm. You're probably going to have to combine all the techniques together just to start seeing some results. And you're probably going to have to start doing those techniques combined together. You might even have to do that stuff for months, if not years, just to get yourself right. Because again, everybody's different. If doing the internal work is not a priority for you, then it's probably going to be a long time before you see any sort of results that you want to see, whether it's manifesting an SP or manifesting a job or whatever the case may be. Once you do the internal work, it becomes a hell of a lot easier to come up with your end scenes, because like Florence said, when you don't have any subconscious blocks in a sense and you do the work on yourself, the subconscious mind will flash the end scene into your conscious mind, and you'll know, oh, okay, this is the end scene that I should be imagining. And then it kind of just comes into fruition, and you don't have to sit back and you don't have to try to imagine an end scene. Because the thing that I realized with a lot of people is, a lot of you guys, for instance, with your SPs, you guys are trying and struggling so hard to, if you can visualize, you guys are trying and struggling so hard to come up with these end scenes of you and your SP together. And on top of that, you guys are coming up with unrealistic end scenes that really make no sense in your situation, that you honestly don't believe in your heart is gonna happen. For instance, a lot of you guys are getting into fights with your SP. I mean, major fights, you know, whether it's verbal abuse, whether it's physical abuse, and then you guys will break up and you haven't seen them in maybe 6 months or whatever the time frame is. And then all of a sudden you're trying to do a visualization of you guys being back together and you guys being married. No, this stuff don't work like that. That is an end scene that is too far-fetched for 90+% of the people to try to visualize after going through something so traumatic like verbal abuse or physical abuse in a relationship. So in my opinion, instead of wasting time trying to come up with an end scene, it is much better to do the internal work and allow the subconscious, like Florence Scovel Shinn talks about, to flash the end scene to you, and you'll know naturally, oh, this is the end scene that I'm supposed to be visualizing, because it's gonna feel easy, it's gonna feel effortless, it's gonna come from your intuition, and you're just gonna know naturally, oh, this is the end scene that I'm supposed to use. Because what I tell people is, when you create an end scene, when that end scene comes, even if you're trying to force an end scene, it should be an end scene that realistically you can see happening within the next 12 months. So if you're trying to get an SP back, you shouldn't be doing, like I just mentioned, you shouldn't be doing these living in the end scenes of you and your person together married. If you guys just went through something super traumatic, that's unrealistic, and that's just gonna delay the time most likely. When Neville says go to the end, in my opinion, what most people should do is you should go to the end of an end scene that you could realistically see happening within the next 12 months or less. Somewhere in between that, the time period of where you're at currently, and then 12 months from that time period. That's when you should create a scene that you could realistically see happening. And that's kind of what I did when I had manifested the text message all those years ago, is I had did the internal work on my self-concept, and then what I did was the end scene naturally came to me. I made another video about this over a year or two ago. I don't remember exactly when I did, but the end scene naturally came to me of, oh, it's gonna be a text message. I didn't try to think about it. I wasn't like, oh, what's my end scene gonna be? I don't know. It was so easy, it was so effortless. The end scene just popped in my head, boom, text message. Because I knew in my heart, like, yo, this can happen within 12 months. This is realistic. And within 10 months, the text message came. So again, I was able to do this, in my opinion, because of two things: doing the internal work of self-concept, and then on top of that, I created a scene, or I allowed my subconscious mind to present a scene to me in a perfect way of the text message without me having to think about it or try to force it in a sense. And it just unfolded naturally. So I want all of you guys watching this video to really think about, how much work are you doing? Are you doing enough work? Are you not doing enough work? Do you think you should be doing more? Are you in the sweet spot? Do you think you're doing just enough? Because in my opinion, most people aren't doing enough work, and the results show. The results show 100% that you're not doing enough work. And like I just gave you early in the beginning of this video, many of these people who see great results, they basically dedicate a lot of time to doing the internal work, whether it was Joe Dispenza, whether it was Jesus, whether it was whoever. A lot of these people, you know, they dedicate their time. Very few people can get away with just saying a couple affirmations and then stuff just shows up. Very few people can get away with visualizing once or twice and then dropping it, letting it go, as Neville says, and then just letting it come to them. Very few people can manifest that way. Like I said, Joe Dispenza, he fought with himself. He fought with himself every day in the hospital bed because he didn't have anything to do. That's all he could do, was really literally just fight with himself and say, I'm gonna sit here until I can get myself in a state of the wish fulfilled of me walking again. That's exactly what he did, and which is why he was able to make it happen so quickly. And so this is why holding yourself accountable is so important, and not comparing your situation to another person's situation is so important. Because Tim and I have worked with people where we realize, yo, you're gonna need a ton of work. You just visualizing and saying affirmations isn't enough. I'm sorry, that's not gonna, and this is why we always say people need at least 6 months to a year, most likely, to start seeing some significant improvement. You know, a lot of people think they're gonna see improvement quickly, overnight, or in less than 30 days. And you can see that type of stuff with some things. You can see that with some things. When you have no attachment to stuff, you can see stuff like that happen very quickly. But when you have attachment to stuff and you have deep-rooted fears and stuff that's unresolved, most likely it's not gonna happen as fast as you think, and it's gonna take you a lot longer. And the faster you can figure out and do the work, the faster you can heal and solve that trauma. But you have to come up with a routine, and you gotta stick with it. You know, I've worked with people for a few years and they still see no change. And they'll come back to me a year later, or however many time frame, or whatever the case may be, a couple months later, and they'll say, Marv, nothing is happening. And I'll say, well, what have you been doing? And the answer is nothing. I'm back to being the old person. I'm back to being the old man, because nobody is holding me accountable. Nobody is holding my hand. And that's another thing. is when you start to do this work on yourself internally, when you go out into the world, it's like Joe Dispenza says in his meditation. When you do your meditation and you get up out of that meditation, you cannot go back to being the old man. You have to be the new man. That new person is who you have to be. And a lot of times people do this work and they start off and they might be good for a month or two, and then they fall out of it. And then they go back to all of their old habits, because it's hard to undo 30 years or 40 years or 20 years, however old you are. It's hard to undo those bad habits that you've picked up for all of those years. So it's our default setting is to go back to who we were. And so many people fall into this trap and they never grow. And so, like I said, when they talk to me, they're like, oh, Marv, everything's falling apart. And I'm like, well, I already know what the answer is you probably weren't consistent at your routine. You probably weren't consistent following up with whoever you were working with, whatever coach or whatever the case may be. You weren't consistent with any of it. And so, of course, you're gonna fall right back into the same old thinking patterns and beliefs. So when you do this work, like Joe says, when you get up out of that meditation, you gotta be that new person. You can't walk and talk like the old person when you get up out of that meditation. In the real world, in the physical 3D world, you gotta ask yourself every day when you get up. In the real physical 3D world, ask yourself, who am I being today? Am I being the old man or am I being the new man? In every situation that you're in your life, in your work environment, in your relationship, at home, any area of your life, you gotta ask yourself in the moment, who am I being right now? And the only thing that can help you with this is consistency. Consistency and rewiring all of those neurons in your brain and all of that type of stuff, because we have the science to back this up now. This is exactly what's going on. It's been proven. And so all you gotta do is just stick to it, which is why you hear so many people say persist. You hear Neville or whoever, all these coaches and everybody say persist, persist, persist. But most people don't persist because, again, they get caught up in the everyday stuff, everyday struggle, everyday whatever. So yeah, be honest with yourself. Ask yourself, do I need to do more work? Because most likely you do need to do more work. You need to do the internal work. The internal work is what's gonna make you prosperous. The internal work is what's gonna really help you get things faster. Without the internal work, the external work very rarely shows up unless you kill yourself and put in 15, 20 hours a day working, which I know most of you guys don't wanna do. So if you don't wanna take that route, then the only route to take is to do the internal work. But at the end of the day, like I started this video, faith without works is dead. You can't avoid doing the work. So you gotta choose your work. Choose what work are you gonna do? Are you gonna do the physical work, the physical labor of killing yourself for 20 hours a day? Because you can do that and still get to your goal. You can do the physical work of going on 100 dates, 200 dates to try to find your perfect person. You can do that. You can do all of this hard work to try to get your SP back, or you could do the real work, the internal work, which is staying consistent with it, whatever your routine is, and getting in the state of the wish fulfilled of you being with your SP. To me, that's what really matters. That's the work that I would choose to do over doing physical work all day, every day. If I could choose to do any work, I would 100% choose to do the internal work instead of the physical work. The problem is most people don't have the discipline to continue to do the internal work.